Namaste and in la catch. And this week, I'm not going to worry about putting in the intro trailer. We're just going to jump into some clips from last year as part two of the recap. And then I'd like to share the original show of For One World that was just a discussion between a couple of guys and their hopefuls for what the show could do. So thank you so much and have a great year. Happy 2022. Namaste in la catch. I'll see you next week.
Your passion and my passion is creating, a new world, a unified world where difference is allowed. So respecting differences and knowing that we're equal but different.
Yeah, embracing them and aligning them. It doesn't change the nature of the division of labor, the things that need to be done. What it does do is it changes the attitude with which we do them.
Absolutely. And there's so much talk about inclusion, embracing everybody, but I think it's not done from the heart sometimes. If you only do it from the head, inclusion doesn't work very well.
Right.
This idea of not making assumptions, which we all do, and we will be judgmental, but in that space, in that time, you're not. And you're not trying to act on anything that said. This is another thing that the world of traditional business finds very difficult. They go, but what about KPIs? What about action? I said, that's later. What you're doing is you're seeding creative wisdom.
Right. You got to slow down to move fast.
Absolutely.
And by doing that, it diminishes the entropy.
Yes. And my vision and dream is that just by learning that technique, we can start bridging the divide, because we do have a divide. We have a divide on so many issues at the moment, whether it's race or sexual orientation or whatever it is, generation. And we're not going to get a better future if we keep on dividing and dividing.
Right.
It's like that statement, was it unified we grow, united we fall. I can't remember. Divided we still.
Right. A house divided cannot stand is, I think, with Ben Franklin, right, or somebody like that. That's the unified field, so to speak, is ever present. It's acquiescing to that, which is what your process at least opens the door for. And from what I heard you saying, that feeling, right, of which, and even mentioning Redfield's work, it goes back to the ancient indigenous philosophy of the three brains, the gut, the heart, and the head, and that we feel things first. So this is kind of where Redfield thinks, yes. You have to sit with it. You have to feel the movement in order to participate in it. And it's a 1, 2, 3, as opposed to the reverse, which is what we tend to do because we have no training in the other. We have no permission to be emotive.
Yes. And permission is a very important word, because I think we, in the traditional old world that we're leaving, where it was so, you've got to make money, you've got to be profitable, you've got to hit your targets, you've got to go up a grade. It's all fixed.
And all metric driven.
Yeah, and it's not allowing for creativity. Our school system doesn't, our corporate world doesn't. And yet being creative is what human beings are all about. We are born to be creative.
Can we find the commonality within those various expressions so that it makes it easier for everyone to buy in to that collective?
Yes. And that is key to the responsibility piece, because you're taking responsibility for your own acts, but I don't believe we should take responsibility for acts that will give damage to somebody else. You can still be yourself and share your opinion or your experience. If you preface it, you say, well, this is my view and my view alone.
Right.
And I expect you to have a different view. So let's explore where these create the river of truth together between us.
But she said, where are you from? And then she heard, again in a sing-song fashion, the answer came through her thoughts, Arcturus. Now, because my wife Hollis had never been really technically into astronomy. She didn't know all of the stuff that I had learned when I was 10, and into astronomy, that Arcturus is what they call a hypergiant now. I believe a red hypergiant. It's a star. So she says to me, Arcturus, is that a place? I go, oh, yeah. That's astronomy 101. It's a hyper red giant. It's a star system. So they're telling you they're Arcturians. She goes, okay. And then they slowly started fading away, and then they were gone. And if you know her, instead of being afraid or unable to sleep or whatever, or turning out all the lights, some people would, she just went to sleep and kept it to herself till the following morning. And so I, who thought I had the coolest stories around, suddenly I'm sitting there, as they say, my jaw dropped as I'm listening to this.
And now you're envious.
So and I'm going, okay, you win that one. That is an awesome story. And then she said to me, okay, that's a place. Now it's personal to me. It's personal. They were here. Can I come with you next year? And we've been together on this journey ever since then, because they made it personal. And during interviews, I always like to thank them wherever they are, if they're listening in, to thank those Arcturians, because they deliberately made it personal to her, to my significant other, in a way that mattered,
right,
to help her realize the universe is as big as she thought, and it actually had eyes and had thoughts and had bodies. And so, yes, it was personal. And she joined me in this exploration that we've been doing.
Well, to me, that makes perfect sense, right? I understand, at least to some degree, that thoughts and feelings and words are all vibrations, and that these advanced races have developed their sensitivity far beyond ours. We think of, for instance, we have 5 senses using 10% of our brain. That's kind of an accepted axiom, right? Well, what about the other 90%? And if you do a simple ratio, could we have 45 more senses with that? Or are those 5 distributed similarly in those other 9, perhaps, planes? And William Swigert had a technique called multiplane awareness that kind of lends itself to,
when you really stop to think about all of the things that happen up here in our brains that we don't even know, and it makes us who we are. It makes us respond to the world around us the way we do. But what becomes even more fascinating is when you are able to kind of ground yourself and be introspective and really look at, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling right now? I've worked with a lot of folks in recovery, and we always say, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is always something else. Like whatever it is you're complaining about right now, or that you're feeling that is the problem, dig deeper, because that's not the problem. And I think that for so many of us, it really does, to your point, it takes discipline. You have to be able to, it's hard to step outside yourself too. When we talk about looking at the world through someone else's lenses, that is not an innate skill for us. We inherently see the world through our own lenses, colored by our own experiences. So to be able to say, I'm going to step into this person's shoes, it's not just step into that person's shoes and see it from where they sit, but the hard part is to understand that that person's position is shaped by that person's experiences. We can't possibly know what those experiences are that shape another person's views.
And what we can do, is be intuitive enough, and perhaps maybe even this is where the life coaching thing has come out, and especially on the transformational side, which is what I do, is that intuitive questions of, okay, where, somebody presents a stumbling block, and then we begin to peel the layers of the onion back in order to find where that really came from, if they can do so. And the common response is, I don't know. And so it's like, well, let's just play with it a little bit. What if you did know?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what if you just explored? You don't have to be right or wrong, but let's just explore the possibilities there and take a look at it. And in that safe place, then it opens up the door for people to dig deeper. There's a lot of elegance and wisdom and simplicity,
Yeah.
and in cursory views. So as you're looking forward, how do you see this work that you've been doing and its effects impacting the environments that you're in? I know you've had work with Amex and Ben & Jerry's and Harvard University, Johnson Johnson, a lot of these larger corporations, which seem to be some of the challenges that we face today in their mismanagement of personnel and politics and all that kind of stuff. So how do you see that changing within those realms and the effect of trust building?
Well, first and foremost, I think trust building is absolutely critical now more than ever. And I know I said that 31 years ago, but it is so true. I think
it's an ageless bit of wisdom,
it's
right?
universal, it's ageless, and it goes back to eons in time, etc. I mean, while we've been at the forefront of as of late research, as in over the last 3 decades, obviously the need and the importance of what it is has been around for eons. But I think now, because leaders need to first trust in and of themselves, they need to have and exude the confidence and feel comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguous situations, because that's what's happening. I mean, all this is new ground. As we begin to come out of the pandemic, we need to begin to trust people more than ever. And yet, but it's not blind trust or stupidity here. We're talking about appropriate trust. All right. Trusting people's character, trusting people's communication, trusting people's capability, and what is wanted and needed to help them in their character, communication, and capability, to expand that capacity for trust. And that capacity for trust is first and foremost trusting ourselves, which expands our ability to trust in others.
I remember years ago when I was starting out in business, I really latched on to people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who had business experience, because I was a young kid. I did not have any business experience. And when somebody was sincere, and they wanted to give me some type of business information or some type of a object lesson, I would listen because I respected their experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, they were telling me how to model my life after their success. And you're right, those people are genuine. A lot of them do want to impart what they've learned because they want to make this a better world. They want you to be a better person. And invariably, I see that they have a clear-cut plan, program, call it what you will. It's usually a simple plan, and they're disciplined. I'm going to repeat that. They're disciplined. They follow it. They actually believe in what they're doing. They're disciplined. They practice what they preach.
Even just a subtle shift in perspective can open up a huge door for learning.
Well, let's look at scalar energy, quantum energy. It's infinite intelligence. It's shared by everybody. And although we come from a different background, nonetheless, we all share that commonality, that common life force energy.
The carbon atom, for instance.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Well, regardless of your age, your disposition, your genetic disposition, your background, your cultural background, it's scalar energy, it's quantum energy, it's consciousness that is essentially going to be responsible for your being, for maintaining your creation.
When you really stop to think about all of the things that happen up here in our brains that we don't even know, and it makes us who we are. It makes us respond to the world around us the
Mhm.
way we do. But what becomes even more fascinating is when you are able to kind of ground yourself and be introspective and really look at, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling right now? You know, I've worked with a lot of folks in recovery, and we always say, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is always something else. Like whatever it is you're complaining about right now, or that you're
Yeah.
feeling that is the problem, dig deeper, because that's not the problem. And I think that for so many of us, it really does, to your point, it takes discipline. You have to be able to, you know, it's hard to step outside yourself too.
Mhm.
When we talk about looking at the world through someone else's lenses, that is not an innate skill for us. We inherently see the world through our own lenses, colored by our own experiences. So to be able to say, I'm going to step into this person's shoes, it's not just step into that person's shoes and see it from where they sit, but the hard part is to understand that that person's position is shaped by that person's experiences. We
Right.
can't possibly know what those experiences are that shape another person's views.
And what we can do, and yes, and what we can do is be intuitive enough, and perhaps maybe even this is where this, you know, the life coaching thing has come out, and especially on the transformational side, which is what I do, is that intuitive questions of, okay, where, you know, somebody presents a stumbling block, and then we begin to peel the layers of the onion back in order to find where that really came from, if they can do so. And the common response is, I don't know. And so it's like, well, let's just play with it a little bit. What if you did know?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what if you just explored? You don't have to be right or wrong, but let's just explore the possibilities there and take a look at it. And in that safe place, then it opens up the door for people to dig deeper. In your mind, from a holistic systems thinker perspective, might some of the things that we could anticipate seeing coming up, or that the audience may be looking for in order to connect themselves to something greater?
So I would say the first thing is to really tap into flow as best as one can, and to think about what lights up your soul, like truly. And in the book, I talk about this idea of sparks. You see people's sparks light up, and
Yeah.
sparks are different for everybody. For old ladies, it could be sitting around knitting, and it can light up their sparks, and there's this flow that comes into their knitting. And for some people it's writing, and some people it's poetry, some people it's playing basketball, and everybody has that thing. And I say the more we can tap into that, the more it's going to open up more. So really think about that. What lights up your soul? What animates you? What gets you out of bed? What gives you something to look forward to? And then use that as kind of a true north to guide you somewhere else. Go all in on that. Really, really cultivate that. But something else I'm really working on now, and I'm actually creating a new workshop around it, and working on a new book around this, is this idea of how do we unlock flow on an individual and collective basis. And this is in no way to disparage anybody who is a follower of any kind of traditional religion or anything. In fact, I had this incredible, I would say, moment hit me on a road trip I was on a few weeks ago, where this idea just became crystal clear in my mind, that there are many different paths to the truth, and they manifest in many different ways. And those who have, you know, to use the 2020 word, pivot to this way of saying, you don't have the truth because you haven't found my way. And a lot of people in the spiritual realm talk about people who follow traditional religions that way. And I don't.
It's not my way, it's Yahweh, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
You know what I mean?
Yahweh. It's only
It's very kind of smugly spoken, like, well, you're just following an ancient book, but I know the real truth. There's so many different paths to it. And so when I say this idea of, like, you know, like a mass or anything, this is not a knock on Catholicism, but it's a knock on those who are not communicating the truth from a place of joy, from a place of passion, from a place of soul animation, but rather from a place of rigidity and tight boxes and rules and playing the part in the role. And you can't ever get anybody excited that way.
You know, when I always go back to the three brains. You just described the whole mammalian brain cycle, you know, and And 'cause I love the data dump, and I like the technical part of it, and you put it in such great, like, simplified English for me. But it's just like when you tie in with the emotions, and you keep on tying with an emotion that doesn't work, or when someone talks about a bad experience they have, they keep on reliving that experience again and again and again every time they have that process. It's so much easier to create a new thought, actually, than it is to keep on talking about that same thing, because in reality, in your brain, not only are you, or if you talk about something that you're afraid something's going to happen to you in the near future, and you explain it out in great detail, well, it's happened once, you talk it happened twice, and then when you get there, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's going to happen. Generally speaking, people
Right, because
live
you've created the habit.
So yeah, so not only do you do it once, you've done it 3 times so far. So it's like, and then you have a habit, and habits become rituals. You don't want those kind of habits to become rituals. You want to break that stuff.
Absolutely. And being able to see it and shift it gives you the opportunity to do so. Just being able to be aware of that opportunity is what makes the difference. Now, speaking to that, how do you suggest to yourself, first of all, and to others, how to become more aware of the opportunities?
Well, what I think you have to do, when I'm looking at, I think of everything as being an opportunity. So, so that's where, I start my line in the sand. I look at everything as opportunity. Then the question is it for me, against me, or not for me? And so, and is this the right time?
The circumstantial narrative-based drivers of all that fear for most people. Circumstantially, I was at the worst one could be in a terrestrial material world and frame. And the consciousness awareness that became accessible in the quiet was that even where we are now this minute, we're okay. We're alive.
No danger.
No danger. And lo and behold, we didn't end up on the street. We ended up with some friends, and we navigated and put the pieces together, and and that the other fundamental piece was, and it was sort of like back at that apartment door, right? So do I believe the world is fundamentally, the universe is abundant, or do I believe it's filled with scarcity and threat and danger? Which wolf do I want to feed? And in that moment, the commitment, the decision was, it's an abundant universe. I'm going to feed the white wolf.
And
I'm done. I'm done. That's a completely internal decision.
Right.
I am done feeding the other wolf.
Now, here's the interesting thing. You were talking about being, in the terrestrial stuff, right? And all of this pressure we feel are from outer circumstances and programmed attitudes that we've picked up throughout our lives from various sources, right? We're an assimilation of everything and every person we've encountered. And especially when our parents, that's the core, church, social organization, school, those kinds of things. Since you mentioned terrestrial, I'm going to go the other direction for just a moment and mention a guy named Wilbert Smith, who in the 50s ran Canada's UFO investigation, funded by the Ministry of Transportation. So it was a legitimate program, well-respected scientist and leader of his own right. Well, he kept memoirs over his period because he had actual conversations with what he called people from elsewhere. And of course, they would drop these tasty tidbits here and there, and he included them in his memoirs, never published them. They weren't published till 2 years after his death. And of course, incomplete, but still, they're there. And they happen to fall in my lap this last year. And I'm reading them. I've got all these thoughts and images and all just racing through my head as I'm reading these memoirs. And one of the things that they said to him is, we live half inside and half outside. So we've been paying attention to all the outside and neglected the inside. And then that guy you mentioned earlier, that come to Jesus moment, he even said, make the without as the within. What kind of steps, granted you're still early in the process, right, as we've talked about.
Yeah.
How do you see that process rolling out and the potential layers or steps or activities that need to take place in order for this to come, this new living awareness, let's call it,
Yeah.
to become present
Yeah.
over time?
I think it's about being in circles that resonate. So like when I think about, for instance, when I bring people together or Stronger Together X, like-minded people start attracting, coming together. I think when we have a safe space where everyone can share very openly with no judgment, then we learn, right, so much more. And we're learning directly from the people in the community, and we learn about what's happening in the world from them, right? Because we're connecting globally.
Right.
We're then seeing what really is, and also we're also learning to better ourselves, like by learning new ways. It's just like when I talk to you, I learn something. I mean, I learn lots of things every time, right? Because you know, we all have different wisdom.
Well, we both have insatiable curiosities, Lisa.
Exactly, but then
you can't help but learn with that.
Oh, exactly, right? Imagine if you collectively bring larger and larger circles like this together, right? And then from around the world, all of a sudden, right? You started, everyone's frequency started vibrating higher. And also at the same time, we're learning so much more wisdom. That's how I feel like every single day I'm learning. Every conversation I have, I'm learning. So it's about coming together with people who resonate with you, but also having an open mind. I always come from the standpoint of, I don't know what I don't know, but I want to know. Right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, so much knowledge and people start showing up to teach me.
Now, do you find that in doing this, that your own inner child kind of woke up again?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
What was that like?
It was a combination of two things, actually. First, it felt like a light going on, almost as if I had just been allowed or invited to go home again. And I realized, wow, I can do that. And then the second thing was that it caused me to wonder about how or why I had ever forsaken that in the first place. And just before we started to record, you used the phrase, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was, but it had to do with that sense of somehow knowing.
Inner knowing.
Inner knowing, thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, I've been aware of this my whole life, that I had never completely abandoned that inner knowing, but I don't know that I ever thought I could fully exercise it again. And being in groups of children, sometimes 300 and 400 at a time, it gave that back to me.
Oh, I can imagine that. I taught high school for almost a decade, and the feeling of being engaged and getting the students engaged, and mine, I think, were probably a little different level. I was high school, and you generally deal with the younger crowd.
Yep.
Still, there's that, and even in high school, they haven't completely lost that sense of awe, wonder, and curiosity, although many of them have by that time, and that's unfortunate.
Do we surrender that, or do we have it taken from us?
At least it appears that we've tried to exercise our brains to identify everything, right? We've approached life from a very left brain, chronological, structural, hierarchical, silo-ish kind of way. And yet this right brain, it's like Tom Campbell talks about explaining the right brain world to a left brain thinker. And it's almost impossible to do because it's experiential.
Yes. It's absolutely. I mean, even I think it's the Dalai Lama or Buddha, right? The encouragement was, don't just hear my words and, trust my words. Go out and have direct experiences. So, to your point, Zen, it's like your direct experiences of being resentful or being hurt, or the sadness that you have felt in different experiences in your life. My experience of feeling terrified all the time, my experience of having an adult in my tiny little body, it was called annihilating rage. I mean, wow, talk about something that you think is going to take you out.
Why in the world would you want that for someone else too? So that natural place in us, I think, that's free of that, that pain, that suffering, why would we want to inflict that on others? And yet we often practice what we learn until we can establish that just doesn't feel right. Right.
Exactly.
They think, we may think that it's okay because it's the reaction that we have, and my gosh, they deserve it. Right. Well, do you deserve it? If I'm another you, would you treat yourself that way? Right. And sometimes we do, because that's how we grow up and that's what we're taught. And then we have to break out of that shell. Now, how did you work through that? You had this, let's say, a horrific childhood in some respects. What process did you go through in your later years, your teens, your early 20s, to kind of grapple with that and see it from a different place?
Yeah, the perpetrations are real, but back to your question of how did I come through that? And what I've learned is I just get to feed my true self. So I'm a daily meditator for now since 2014, and we're 2021. And that has been a transformative practice. Getting still, getting quiet. And some people, if you don't want to call it meditation, do what, unplug, just disconnect, take a walk in nature, listen to the trees.
I have a little
have a multi-sensory experience.
Well, I came back in for just a moment in between the previous clips and the original One World, just to share that the reason I did this is I had a spiritual awakening at 18, an answer to a question of actually hit my knees and I prayed to know what truth was and was willing to die for it. And the following week on 11/11/75, I was asked during meditation if I was willing to die for what I believed in. Well, I thought for a moment after, my whole body clenching, going, gosh, what do I believe in? And my first thought was Christ consciousness. Felt a little empty. I thought, so cosmic consciousness, that feels full. Yes. So I gave it up. And within moments, I was out of body and into this brilliant white light that had an iridescent, effervescent, really high-pitched sensation to it. And after a few moments there, realizing I could think, I was analyzing the situation, I thought, wow, is there more? Because the white light was kind of empty other than the sensation. And I felt a movement into an indigo background that had points of light surrounding me. And I intuitively knew that they were points of consciousness, whether in body or not. I wasn't sure because I knew I wasn't. And at that point, the voice picked back up and says, these are those that you are to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Understatement. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time. Trust and allow. And then I felt another rush of energy and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air. So the significance of being able to have this opportunity for One World was to dive into the lives of others and question what prompted them to do what they're doing from both inner and outer perspectives, what fears they encountered, how they overcame them, and how they saw that being reflected in the common human experience around them. We did over 120 shows over a 2.5-year period, and what an educational experience for me. Now, 30 years later, I've come off the hiatus and we're doing One World and a New World. And so with that, I thank you once again and here's one world.
Hi, I'm Roger Schnellenberger.
And I'm Bruce Benefiel. Welcome to One World.
Tonight, Bruce and I are going to be discussing the program, a concept, if you will, called One World. The show, by design, looks at and raises consciousness about this global perspective and world we live in. Normally, Bruce will be the interviewer of people from around the valley, but tonight we thought it would be good to interview Bruce to see his perspectives on One World. Let's get right to Bruce. Bruce, what do you mean by One World?
One World, I think, can be summed up in the concepts of what is encompassed in what we currently know as the quote-unquote New Age.
By New Age, we often feel that it gets a bad rap. What would be your perspective of New Age in terms of putting that into words, into a concept that people would not shun at and be a bit more open to discuss?
New Age, I think, simply can be put as the balancing of existing systems, including belief systems. You know, we all adhere to some kind of belief system, and the balancing of those in order to work in harmony. You know, God knows that this world is so out of kilter right now because of misinformation, because of lack of information, which creates ignorance, which in turn creates fear. I like to think of fear as false evidence appearing real. And we get caught in the illusion. And we don't realize that we're here together. And we live separately rather than in unison.
You made several good points there. One by way of what fear means to me. I feel that a lot of people are motivated by fear. And I believe it's in our belief systems, particularly in this Western way of thinking, that we're motivated by a lot of selfish interests that seem to me to be opposed to what the New Age way of thinking would be lending to people.
Sure. You know, as I spoke earlier about existing systems, what we're based upon now is basically control type of systems, where there is a certain elite group or person that is in charge and that's not really willing to delegate his complete authority. Whereas with the concept of One World, you have a sharing of responsibility, which brings each person to the level of their own accountability. And I think that can be a better term rather than using New Age, you know, the age of accountability. We've got to be responsible for what we do and how we act.
True. Let me ask you, Bruce, what do you want to do with this show? In your opinion, from your perspective, what would you want people that watch One World to go away from the show from, or with, I should say?
What I want to explore are different perspectives, different belief systems, to view them objectively, to ask critical questions, to ascertain the essence or the truth surrounding the core of that belief system. And in turn, sharing the information. If people want to have more information, we've got a P.O. box, or we'll have a P.O. box that will make that information available.
So this concept of One World is something that extends well beyond the parameters of a television show.
Oh, sure. The shows that I'm going to be doing and the people that I'm going to be interviewing are going to be providing basic information, nothing too detailed, because we can get lost very easily. And in the time span of a half an hour, we can just barely touch the surface on most of the issues.
True. Well, Bruce, let's talk about you and how you came to this decision or evolving in this process, coming upon the whole idea of creating One World. How are you involved in this?
Well, throughout my life and childhood, I'd had many different experiences that led me to striving for harmony, for balance, for loving one another, and sharing that openly and honestly. So as I began looking at the world around me, seeing what was there, seeing what I thought needed to be changed in order to create better existing working relationships, and relationships cover the whole gamut, whether it be at work, personal, love life, with God the Creator or whatever. We're all involved in relationships, and these need to be brought into harmony. So what had happened is, during a process that I was going through, I explored what it would take to bring these existing systems together, and came up with the idea of an international cultural center that would blend the essences of each culture, both the psychospiritual technologies as well as the scientific technologies. And from that point would bring forth creative solutions to the problems that we face globally, and have the technology to take care of it.
Right. One thing that always troubles me about people wanting to, I guess, discuss a global community and New Age thinking, it's very good, but they seem to be incredibly ethereal and very vague about the idea of love and relationships. When it seems to me, I come from a classical realist education.
Sure.
I was in the seminary for some years, and life was a challenge, but a very real challenge, and very daily experiences, rather than being lost in God in that experience, which is very good, and you get a lot of good information from that. I guess what I'm trying to ask here is, how do you propose to make this very real for people? It seems to me there needs to be a living language, a living concept that people need to hear.
I agree.
From people such as yourself.
I agree. You talk about the ethereal approach. It's nice to get caught up in the experience and the feeling, somewhat of a euphoria at times. However, we live in a day-to-day, three-dimensional world that we have to bring those concepts and those feelings back down into and apply. And in essence, walk the talk rather than just spew it out. And that, I feel, is what the current trend is. There's a lot of people that are beginning to take responsibility for their own actions, for their own thinking. It's not what you think, feel, or believe, but how you're perceived. So the actions speak a lot louder than words. It's tough.
Very tough.
Because we have a lot of challenges, we have a lot of blocks, we have a lot of resistance. Because people don't like change. People like things the way they are, or the way they used to be. And in order to move forward, we have to be willing to change and incorporate new information, integrate that, apply it however is necessary, and take each day at a time. Function in reality as it is now, not how it was 5 minutes ago.
Let me ask you something. Have you had an experience, something in your life that was very real to you, very tangible, something you could feel, something you imaged, but yet it was very real, that changed your life, that made you change?
Yeah. It was a very profound experience I had when I was in college. I'd gone through an emotional turmoil. I decided I was going to marry a woman and had broken up with her before I went to school. Went back to ask her to marry me. She'd been married for a month. I'd only been gone 2. So it just destroyed me emotionally. So I went back to school, and in essence, I got down on my knees. And I said, Father, show me what's truth, and I'm willing to die for it. Now, granted, that's a pretty strong statement coming from a 17-year-old kid. Okay?
Indeed.
However, a couple of weeks later, I was in meditation in the afternoon after class, and I was listening to Journey's first album, a song called In the Morning Day. And there was a particular sequence of notes and bars that were put together that made it very conducive for this to happen. Essentially what happened is, during the meditation, I was asked by a voice, voice that was very familiar to me. I'd heard it since I was 6 years old, and has never led me down a wrong road as long as I listened to it. Still small voice, if you will. And from there, this voice says, Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in? And immediately I said yes. Right after that, I was taken out of my body, is what it felt like, because I was catapulted upward. And I went into a white light. Now this white light felt like everything, and yet nothing. All but void. So what I did was look around, because it completely surrounded me, and I was able to see. And I paused for a moment and thought, wow, is there more? And immediately I was taken upon another scene, if you will, and that being of pinpoints of light in a sphere. And this was surrounded by an indigo color. I was in the center of it. And it was explained to me that these were the ones that I was to work with in order to facilitate a New World administration. Blew me away. After that, I was put back into my body, and I say put back in because when I re-entered, it was as though I had not been breathing, my heart had not been beating, because when I came back in, it was a as soon as and it scared me tremendously. There again, I don't know if it was false evidence appearing real or not, but it prompted me to go down to the library that was on the campus there, and I started searching everything to find out what that experience was. The closest thing I came to was that of people who'd gone through near-death experiences, where they had seen a light at the end of the tunnel, but yet not reached it.
Fascinating, fascinating personal experience that obviously meant something to you in your life.
It did, and profoundly. It has made, it gave me a reason for being. Although in expressing that with a lot of different people, I've had a lot of resistance. So I've been very reluctant to share that with many people at one time.
Well, for obvious reasons, it's, if I will, a very naked experience.
Yeah.
But an experience I think a lot of people out there, and I personally have had, very fleeting moments, but sometimes the feeling engages me and stays with me for a long time.
Sure.
I find it very easy to bury as well.
Right. How I operate, or how I attempt to do my best at, is with the simple philosophy of no games, no secrets. The universe doesn't have any. Why should we? All of our thoughts, all of our actions are open for scrutiny to who knows what. So it's as though we are naked. Why not drop those barriers and drop those shields or those masks and share openly and honestly? Because we are. You know, we have these clothing, or this clothing and these bodies, but the true essence of us is there for all to see.
Fascinating. Bruce, let's talk about the show One World and its direction,
Sure.
if we will. What, essentially, who do you want to bring on? What topics do you want to discuss?
Okay, let's start with that. I hope to be able to bring on many different people from areas such as metaphysics, which covers, to date anyway, astrology, numerology, palmistry, channeling, you know, these types of things where there's a lot of consternation and confusion and hodgepodgery. Because there's a lot of people out there that's taking people for a buck, and it's not right. You know, there's a lot of psychics that are out there that are giving readings and things like that are making projections for people. And if people are open to that, they're going to take that in. And they're going to believe that. So they create a whole new belief system. So they're walking around, you know, creating this. So in actuality, the psychic's projections become that person's reality, and they create it. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Sure.
Okay? The other areas I want to explore are those of the socioeconomic systems, how they're working, how they're not working. Political, I don't know if we'll get into that too much at all. I'm sure there will be some political issues raised with the discussions. I want to look at human services and the availability of the means necessary to take care of those less fortunate. I work with developmentally disabled adults now, and that to me has been a tremendous blessing because it gives me another perspective of how those people live, how they're being taken care of, what they're lacking, what they're given, what they're not given. And these are things that I feel, when addressed properly, objectively, critically, openly, when you're striving for the truth of the situation and you're not playing games and you're looking at the truth for what it is. And you may have some stuff on it, you may have some blocks on it, but that doesn't change what the truth is. And that's the
very ugly as well.
Exactly. And quite often is. And that's what we're hoping to change, to give more information which dispels that ignorance, which brings about the knowledge and the wisdom, which is the right action.
Once again, fascinating. And it seems to me that the topics, the issues you wish to probe on One World are very real. There's got to be a very real, tangible sense of approaching people and where they are in terms of what does this mean, these concepts, to the man sitting at home that has 3 children, you know, that's been in a job for 15, 20, 30 years, that has been about a belief for so long, and may suddenly feel a sense of void or not feel the sense of void.
I can only speak for myself. I've got 4 kids. I'm divorced. I love those kids dearly. It bothers me to think the kind of world that we have created may destroy them if we don't change it.
Change. There again, a vague word, but yet a very powerful word, in effect.
One thing that's consistent.
It is consistent. Probably the one thing in the universe that is consistent is change. Understood. The idea, let's move on to the whole practical issue here, though, because your life lends very well to what you believe in terms of helping those less fortunate than yourself, or myself, let's say. It's a very real issue, and there again, one of the reasons why New Age thinking, a lot of metaphysics for that matter, gets a bad rap, because it's nice, it's nice to have these concepts, it's nice to have this idea, but that just it stops for a lot of people just right there at that point.
Sure.
It's not real to them.
A lot of people call them warm fuzzies.
Yeah.
You know, it gives you a warm feeling, but it's like the sales seminars that, you know, multi-level marketing rely upon, the building of emotion, and going out and striving, hey, I'm going to make $1 million tomorrow. That's what these people go out of these seminars feeling. The same thing with the meditations and the channelings and all this type of things. It still needs to be brought down to that practical level. What can I use in my day-to-day living from that? Do I want to? Do I want to have something that I can use? Or do I want to just go and let myself float and feel free or whatever and experience that euphoria and then forget about it when I go to work the next day? You know, you have that separation. We have lifestyles that are built upon separation.
True.
You know, city, state, or state and church, things of that nature. It just, to me, doesn't make sense, because we are one people, we are one planet, we share the food, we share the air, we share the water. Why can't we share cultures? Why can't we share beliefs? And not try to go around and criticize each one of those. Learn more about them. Share information. Me sharing with you, you sharing with me. A Hindu sharing with a Christian. You know, a Taoist sharing with a Muslim.
It's very important. I think we're seeing massive breakthroughs in society today with the USSR, the United States, the relationships we're building there, the Berlin Wall coming down. You're seeing a lot of what we were talking about, the global community, really coming into play here. Just personal experience on my part. I've been watching a lot of Joseph Campbell lately. And
neat guy.
Wonderful, wonderful man. he has a lot of good things to say about these experiences, out of body, if it were, and really relays a lot of what we're experiencing as a Western culture here in Phoenix, as the people that are experiencing the very same thing in a tribal nation in Africa. And it's wonderful just to see that openness, that experience that we all have. It's very real. It's here.
Yeah.
But here again, we have these walls around us. Let me get to my point here, really what I want to ask you here. If you could have one wish, a change, that God would say, Bruce, you have one wish. What do you wish to change? What would that be?
Well, that's a tough one, Roger. I think the one thing that I would want to change is the criticism and the condemnation that people have towards one another.
Mm-hmm. It's a good wish. It would seem to me that would open up a lot of communication, as we said.
Sure.
Seems to me if we communicate with friends, enemies, whoever, a lot of barriers are broken, as I was saying before about the Berlin Wall coming down. It's wonderful, healing stuff we're dealing with here.
Well, there was a guy, a couple thousand years ago that made a big impact on this planet. His name was Jesus Christ. And in his teachings, he taught not to condemn, judge, or criticize unless you can walk in that other man's shoes. It's a physical impossibility. One person cannot get into another person's body to date.
Sure.
So why? You don't know where that person's at. You don't know what he's been through. You don't know what he's experiencing. You don't know what he's hurting from. You don't know what he's joyous about. Unless you can put your own beliefs aside and ask him and be open to what he's willing to share. Or she.
Or she. Definitely want to include all people in this.
Oh, we must not forget the women. I
Oh,
think
yes.
many years ago, from what I understand, this world was set up in a matriarchal system, and there was no war. Makes you
Speak to me
wonder
about this system before the system as we know it.
Well, the information specifically that I'm speaking of is the findings from the arks that have been found in the plateaus of Turkey and that area. They have all had idols, statues, dolls, whatever you want to call them, of female goddesses. No males. And in researching some of the other information, right off the top of my head, I can't pinpoint it because I've read quite a bit of information in my few short years. But it does explain that there was, theoretically, a time where the woman ruled. And if you think about it, she still does.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes,
It's the man's ego that has gotten in the way to progression. Because when we, I say we as men, realize that if it weren't for the women, we wouldn't have children, we wouldn't have the nurturing. Our mothers, gave us tremendous love and affection as children, fed us, clothed us, where our fathers were away working. Our fathers were also working to support our mothers. And it's the denial of that and the controlling nature of man's ego which creates a lot of the problems and creates that duality, if you will.
It's like reason mastering the beast of sorts.
Exactly.
Taming the
Speaking
beast.
of the beast, from what I understand, we get our word Satan from the Greek word thetan, T-H-E-T-A-N. Simply means thinker. If you think about it, your mind, your intellect, is where all duality exists. It's where all judgment exists. And what Christ, as well as the other enlightened ones on this planet have taught, is to operate from the heart. Oneness. It's where the word of God is written. Okay? Listen to it. It speaks very loud.
Fascinating. If you could, do you have anybody off the top of your head that you've been thinking about that you would like to communicate with on the show? Anybody in mind in terms of particular types of people that might give good perspective to one world?
Well, I think there are some very good people. What I'm looking for are people who have not only been in the various fields, but also have the credibility of being there, such as doctorates in parapsychology, okay, MBAs, people who have done their homework and have put the effort out to get where they're at. And I think those people, especially once they've been in, you know, these environments for some period of time, they have both the credibility, the expertise, and the wisdom to go with what they're saying.
Make a lot of sense to me. I think people need real examples to expedite real concepts.
Sure.
And it would seem to me that that'd be a very wise way of approaching the issue, because it is something that is very real. More and more we do have a lot of people that are raising their own consciousness, asking questions. And here again I get back to the whole idea, partly because this has been a new concept for me, as if scales came from my eyes about a year ago, in terms of having a real spiritual enlightenment personally, and yet really starting to see what's going on in terms of what the Bush administration is doing, what people are doing, government, politics, and it's frightening.
It's scary.
Yeah, it is.
Downright scary.
It is scary. Having really not been aware of lies, so to speak. And the thing of it is that they're half-truths mixed with full truths.
Right.
You know, and it's not just the government. You know, they are everywhere.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is they is us.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's what I'm starting to see.
We deceive ourselves so often into believing certain things and putting energy into ideas and concepts that we haven't had the time to test. You know, one of the basic things that I have spent the majority of my life doing is testing my truth, being willing to put it on the chopping block and whack away. What stands, stands. What doesn't is history. But that works for me.
Good point. Good point. It seems to me even people out there in the viewing audience, it's easy to sit back and look at a show such as this and look at those two. Things can be very contrived, or people can think they look very contrived. Often you're not dealing with truth, you're dealing with people's perception of truth.
Exactly.
Their own perception. And what I find it very difficult to, and just in personal relationships, is to deal with that first. You know, there is a truth, and it might be true, and it might be undeniable. It might be an ugly, undeniable truth. You know, but then you may have a total different perspective
But
of that
view
truth.
it for what it is. And by releasing that, we're able to create agreement, harmony, cooperation at many different levels, not only within ourselves, but also within the systems that we work within. You know, it's fine to go up on a mountaintop and meditate, but you're one person up on top of a mountaintop meditating.
It's true.
And you're not doing any damn good to anybody but yourself.
Indeed.
If you're even doing that.
It's a long process. It's a long process, continuing, ever continuing.
Now, that's not to say that going up on that mountain and meditating is wrong or bad, because it is a very integral part of self-development, because you have to take yourself away from things in order to view them. You have to be able to see things objectively and view them, own them, and work through them.
And make them very real in your everyday life.
Sure.
Well, Bruce, thanks. Well, there you have it. Conversation with Bruce Benefiel. Appreciate your enlightening conversation, your journey, as it were. We look forward to several more journeys with other people as you go on.
Thank you very much, Roger. It was a real pleasure having someone to share openly with. And I thank you all for watching, and I hope you do join us for future episodes of One World as we explore things that do create harmony, balance, cooperation, and community.
Thanks for watching.